Hey everybody, on this episode I speak with Richard Abels. He is an experienced B2B sales professional who has sold domestically, internationally. He has led sales teams, grown sales teams, and sold lots of different B2B products and services over his extensive career. I met Richard on LinkedIn, funny enough. I put out a post a couple of weeks ago on, I think I was talking about something to do with like, why are Generation X's and millennials so crap at sales or something like that. And he responded with such a long and thoughtful and detailed response that I was like, oh, okay, this guy clearly knows what he's talking about when it comes to sales and business development. So we booked a call, jumped on a call with him, and I was just blown away. His depth of knowledge of human psychology, how he really deeply understands the physics and the science behind why people buy. And I was like, look, you have to get on the show. I have to get you on the show. How do we make this happen? So I twisted his arm and he's here, and I'm super excited that he's on the show. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Wonderful introduction.
You're absolutely welcome. I'm super excited that you've agreed to do this, and I think we're going to have an excellent wide-ranging conversation about all things to do with sales and business development. For those that don't know you, tell our audience a little bit about who you are and how you got to this point in your career.
Well, I'm Richard Abels. I've really enjoyed a nearly half-century career in sales. First 10 years or so in the retail motor industry, and thereafter in B2B, largely in media and events, but not totally so. I sold in a vast number of verticals. I've managed teams in a vast number of verticals. I've run a couple of businesses, 3 or 4 businesses actually. So I'm accustomed to running sales teams as well as multidisciplinary teams. And how did I get to where I am? After 50 years, I don't think I can remember. Essentially, I lucked my way into sales because somebody discovered I owned a suit, and then had the great fortune to work. Although I was working with, let's face it, car salespeople, I worked with car salespeople that came from the publishing industry. They had been recruited out of Thomson regional newspapers and came with a great deal of discipline and structured skill. And I had the great fortune of being able to work with those people. And although I was never formally trained, actually, I was given the tools simply by being in the room and absorbing it. And I learned in a way that other people in that industry did not, the value of making a sales process consultative. Even in car sales, even in retail car sales, to make the process consultative, to not focus on the cars, but focus on the customer's need, what the customer wanted, what the customer was going to be excited about. And I've carried that into everything that I've done since, everything in my career. I now spend most of my time working with owner-operated businesses, small to medium-sized businesses, in that I only want to work with the owner of the business. I don't want to work with middle management or even senior management in large businesses, fattening frogs for snakes. I've done enough of that, thank you very much. I don't want to do any more of that. So I want to see the benefit of the work that I do directly benefiting the people I'm working with in a very real sense, to the point where their lives are made happier, which is what happens when you're effective and successful in your work.
There's so much there to unpack, Richard. What a fascinating career. So you started in car sales. I've never actually met a car salesman before. I've heard a lot about car salesmen.
Have you never bought a car, Nathan?
I've actually never bought a car, Richard. I haven't. You're learning something, really interesting about me. All the cars that I've driven have been bought by other people or been given to me. That's another conversation, a separate conversation for another podcast entirely. But I've never actually bought a car. The only time I went into and met a car salesman was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I was maybe looking to possibly buy my own car. I never really had any real intention of doing so, but he was brilliant, by the way. He was a great salesman. So my only experience of car salespeople are what I hear about car salespeople, the perception, and that one experience 5 or 6 years ago, and now you. So tell me what it was like in those early days, because as you say, it's a respectable position, but it wasn't a respected position.
That's exactly right.
But it probably did more for your sales career than anything else. I mean, that I would imagine is probably some of the hardest sales that you really ever have to do, because it requires you to build a relationship and rapport with someone relatively quickly, to get them to not only satisfy their answers and answer their questions, but actually help them to make a decision now, actually, because you don't want delay is the death of the sale in many ways. So talk to me about those early experiences as a car salesman. What were the fundamental principles that experience gave you that helped you in the rest of your career?
You said one thing that's very observant. In fact, your summary of car sales is very observant, Nathan, because it really is. It's about building trust very quickly. It's about building rapport very quickly. It's also about closing very quickly. You don't want the customer to walk out the showroom thinking about it. They have to be closed. But let me just say, I had the most incredible good fortune in that the company that I ended up at after 6 months, I moved jobs after 6 months, and I ended up working for a Lada dealership. I don't even know if you know what. Do you know what Ladas are now?
I know what Ladas are.
These Russian cars that were built using Fiat 124 presses.
Wow. Okay.
And they were the cheapest new car on the market. They were competing at the time with Skoda, which is now almost a premium brand. Certainly a high-end, middle-aged, but at the time they were just buckets on wheels.
Yeah.
And Lada was there with FSO, Polski Fiat as it was, and they had a very small part of the marketplace. It was about, in total, Lada had about 2% of the new car market. The bit you're interested in is the sales side of it.
Yes.
And the sales side of it was all on the base. Once you understood that all the customers were interested in is what their monthly payments were and the fact that they were getting a brand new car, that's what you worked with. That was it in total for new cars. You didn't bother with all the other stuff. You did not think, the good salespeople had worked out that nothing else mattered. The test drive didn't matter. Nothing mattered but the payment and the fact that they were able to go down the social club with a V or a W reg car and park it next to the P reg Cortinas. And that's exactly what it was about. And sorry, because that makes the customers sound like idiots. They weren't. They were lovely people and quite often very smart people. And I've never respected customers more than I respected, and I've got to say liked. I've never liked customers more than those people that I sold cars to. And, you know, in those days I was selling to, back when we had them, coal miners, fishermen, farmers. And these were decent human beings. A lot of them without a pot of piddle in, hardly, but with enough residual income that they were able to put it into payments for a new car.
Interesting.
And that was it. Honestly, I look back with great fondness on those days and the people I was selling to.
That's super interesting. There's some really interesting psychology happening there. So let's just unpack that for a moment. So the people that were buying these cars, they wanted to know, could I get a new car at the price of a used car?
Yeah, that was it.
And then could I then take my used car and park it next to my friend's old car and almost show off a little bit? Look,
Oh, that was totally it.
I've got a brand new car.
Yeah.
So it's status and it's reputation.
Totally.
And look, these ideas of status rear their head and come back time and time again. It's about your peer group, your peer set, who are you around, and how do I look in relation to them? That's such a fundamental part of human beings, isn't it? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
I've left that a long time ago now. This is going back 40 years since I left the car business. And since then, obviously, there are other drivers. Once you move into B2B, you're dealing with very different drivers. But as you very astutely pointed out, Nathan, every decision that people make, every purchasing decision they make, the two things that matter to them, first of all, they will take the less scary option, and maybe we'll talk about that later on. Fear's a massive part of why people buy. If you can't take fear out of the buying process as a salesperson, you'll never make a sale. Everybody has fear. Everybody's frightened of what's going to happen once they spend the money. But then the other thing is the idea that what they end up with looks to everybody else, their peer groups, their bosses, whoever, like a really good decision. Well done, mate.
Let's unpack both of those right now. Okay, I love this. I absolutely love this. Okay, so the first one is fear. I totally agree with you. Before we put our hand in our pocket and spend our money, whether it's on a consumer purchase or whether it's a B2B purchase, there's the fear of, shit, what happens if this goes wrong? What happens if I give them my money and it doesn't deliver, or it doesn't give me the result that I want, or it doesn't perform in the way that they said that it would? That's a huge driver. I agree with you. How have you found the best ways in your experience to reduce and lessen fear? Because there are many different ways to do this, right? Guarantees, credibility, logos of past customers, referenceability, promises, many different ways that you can do this. How have you found in your career throughout all of the things that you sold on the consumer and the B2B side to reduce fear?
Well, consumer's different. That's very straightforward. That's all about guarantees. That's all about what happens if this goes wrong. And that's all about warranties. That's really easy. You can deal with that. B2B, on the other hand, and particularly in the area where, I'm saying particularly, and maybe it's not particularly, but it's where my experience is, so that's what I'm working with. If you look at when people are taking a chunk of their marketing budget and they're giving it to you in return for whatever it is they want, exposure, leads, please make it leads. There's got to be, measure your ROI. Everybody measure your ROI, please, all the time. It's what digital's for. You can do that now. There's a massive fear that it's not going to be delivered. And whereas when I started in print, you couldn't really measure ROI. So in those days, and actually, what you mentioned earlier about prestige, all that the guy or lady, you think about it, you put a double-page spread into your industry magazine. All that you've got to show for it is a double-page spread in your industry magazine. That's all there is. Trying to prove afterwards that it had any effect or didn't have any effect, it's almost impossible. So there was far less fear in those days, and it was far more about what's going to make me look good. When I hold the double-page spread up to my boss, is he going to go, oh, great, we've got a double-page spread in that magazine, or oh, heavens, why did you choose that one?
Yeah.
Different now, because now every little bit of effect that digital marketing spend has is measurable if you do your job right. Because for sure, the platform that you're spending the money on, they can tell you how many times your message was seen. You can measure click-throughs, but that's only the beginning of a customer journey. And so and it's very frustrating when you see that it's not happening. You know, you do all this work to create an audience, and digital marketing then goes onto the platform, and you have a look, and the click-through goes through the company homepage. And then you just go, no, that get right. But there's got to be, there's a call to action that gets people to the page.
Right.
Then the page has got to relate to the call to action
Sure.
and draw people through. And the amount of times you have a look, and it's gone to the flaming homepage, and you go, no, please don't do that.
All our hard work.
People are getting a lot more sussed now, and it really depends. You get in a big business, they're not going to do that. And so, for me, probably the most important work that I do is with smaller businesses, to guide them into creating a customer journey. It shouldn't be my job to do that. It really shouldn't. The company should have, before they even come and talk to me, they ought to understand what their customer journey is. But a lot of the time they don't. I have to accept that that's the case and then work with that. Because ultimately, when that decision is made over which platform they're going to use, it will be on the basis of, I've got to produce all this evidence. I've got to evidence the results. Is this going to get me fired? My boss will see the result of what we've done here and of this massive spend, or even a small spend, doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
And there was a wonderful ad that encapsulated this in the 1980s. It was IBM. IBM, you know the one I'm talking about?
I do.
Yeah, no one ever got fired for choosing IBM.
IBM.
And
security, safety, trust, credibility.
Yeah, that was an arrow right to the heart of corporate expenditure. That headline, it was brilliant, and it was straight to the heart of what drives buying decisions. And sadly, it's fear.
It's fear.
And that is the first motivation. If you can't take fear away, as I said, you're never going to make the sale. And you asked, what takes fear away? Well, in this context, quite often it's, well, your peer groups are doing this. And here are some case studies. We can show you what's been achieved by the companies that you look alongside, or maybe the companies you look up to. They're doing this, and they are getting these results, and they've come back and they've used this again and again. This should be your comfort that we deliver, and all that we need to do now is sit down and work out what the best way is to deliver this for you on our platform, and that's reasonable. I'm very proud of the fact that I don't believe that I've ever, in a nearly 50-year sales career, I don't believe I've ever told a lie to make a sale. And I certainly wouldn't do that knowingly. It's just not my nature to do so. I think there are times when sometimes I'm in the past, as a younger man, I think I might have been economical with the truth in that I might have held information back. As I've got older and developed perhaps a little bit more of a social responsibility, I think I don't believe I would even do that. I'm a great believer in full disclosure, even if it means that you
lose the opportunity.
You've got to give the negatives. The objective isn't to lose the opportunity, Nathan, but the objective is full disclosure.
Yeah.
The idea is that people should understand exactly what they're buying, and particularly, as I mentioned earlier, in a world where ultimately what you produce is transparent. It can be seen. The every aspect of the result of what occurs, because they've given you the money and we've delivered their service, we've delivered their exposure. It's all transparent. It's all there. What is the point of being anything other than totally honest, to the point of full disclosure? So I always aim to do that.
So I think you've made so many really interesting points there. Your point about reducing fear and what the salesperson can actually do to reduce that fear, because in many ways, if you're an early stage company and you don't have many case studies or any case studies, or you're selling into, maybe even your established company, but you're selling into a new market and suddenly you don't have a track record in that market, what do you then do to build that credibility? And I think that the reduction of fear is super powerful, but I believe the salesperson has the ability to reduce that fear. I believe the salesperson overwhelmingly has that power and the ability to reduce the fear of the sale, because over and above the how long the brand has been established, or what products you're selling, or what the competition is doing, or what the value, what the price to value is, how expensive your product is, I don't think any of those are as important as the quality of the salesperson and the sales experience. I think if you're able to deliver a fantastic sales experience, I think that in of itself reduces fear. So I think the salesperson has a tremendous role and opportunity in reducing those barriers and actually getting to a successful, positive result.
You see, that's interesting. You said quality, you used the word quality, and I think in the case of a salesperson, that's a very subjective word, because what qualities are going, first of all, what qualities are going to take away fear? And that's personal credibility. Now, some of that just comes, I'm very lucky. I've lived to be this old. And there's something about doing that, first of all, there is a personal credibility that just comes with being freaking old. And I'm pleased, I'm proud to own that, But
You're right.
also, the next, you said quality. And when you and I had a conversation about a week ago, where I raised something that I'm going to bring up again, because I think it's really important, and it strikes at the heart of what makes a good salesperson, what makes a salesperson. There's no such thing as a bad salesperson in my experience. You're either a salesperson or you're not. If you're a bad salesperson, go get another job. If it can't be trained out of you very, very quickly, you're in the wrong job. That's my view. There are just salespeople.
You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. There is no in between.
Absolutely. And when I've recruited salespeople, and particularly when I'm recruiting rookies, when I'm taking first jobbers, there is a tendency, and I used to see this because I used to use recruiters, and there is a tendency with recruiters to send along to you a lot of very lively little puppies. And there is a tendency amongst employers to recruit the liveliest puppies. The ones that jump up and down and lick your face and make a lot of noise. I'm not interested in those people. The thing that interests me every time is I test their listening skills. Because good salespeople are listeners. You can teach somebody what to say. As a manager, a trainer of salespeople, you can teach them what to say. You can't teach them to listen, not active listening. I mean, you can, but it's too much work. Why not start with the one quality that is rarest and most valuable and build up from there? And that's listening skills, active listening skills. By active listening, I mean not hearing, I mean listening, understanding, and being able to respond. Now, that being able to respond, that's the bit where you train them what to say. And you train them how to deliver a journey during a sales conversation. How sales, is a process. And how to manage the process. But you can only manage the process through understanding of the client. You can only understand the client if you've listened to the client, not just listened to them, but tested your understanding of what you've heard, and then taken them to the next place. And so when I talk about quality salespeople, what I'm talking about are the great listeners, not the great talkers. The gift of the gab. Oh, how I hate that phrase. Stuff the gift of the gab. I'm not interested.
Richard, you're speaking my language because, as you know, I think introverts are the best salespeople on the planet. I'm just putting it out there because we listen. In fact, it's our favorite hobby. It's our favorite pastime because we don't actually like to speak very much. But, we like to put the focus on other people. Like, we don't want the spotlight on ourselves. And I think that's a great characteristic of great salespeople. I want to unpack this listening thing because some people listening to this will go, I listen. How hard is that? I listen all the time. Listening is very easy, right? Of course I listen to the customer. They're talking, I listen. But I think what you're saying is something very different. What you're saying is active listening. What you're saying is you're not just listening to the words that they're coming out of their mouth. You're listening to the underlying issues. You're not just listening for the smoke that's bellowing out of the building that gives you an indication that there's a fire in the basement, but you're listening so that you can understand, oh my God, there is a fire in the basement. And actually we need a fire engine right now because that's the urgent priority. And I think what most people do is they listen and they go, oh, okay, I've heard the smoke. That's the smoke. So I'm going to respond to the smoke.
Nathan, I don't think they listen at all.
Oh.
I actually think that, and you can see it. Well, let's go back to the very start, the point where you're going to recruit people. The ones that are out the door immediately are the ones that are too busy thinking about what they're going to say next. And quite often, you've been in social situations. Let's forget about sales. You've been in social situations many, many times, as have I, where you've been with somebody who you think is responding to what you're saying, and then you realize they haven't even heard what you said.
That's my 11-year-old.
Because what they've said is a total non sequitur and simply relates to what was on their mind at the time. Well, those people apply for sales jobs. The buggers. And they've just got to go. They have got to go. Those are the first people you identify as being out. They're out the process immediately. You spot them early. And more to the point, the ones that are actually listening and responding. It isn't about, what you're describing there, that thing about the fire in the basement. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But that comes as a result of having listened, asked, listened, asked, listened, qualified, asked, and then you understand what the fire in the basement is. To be honest, the world's full of people who don't even notice the smoke.
Wow.
And sometimes they end up in sales. And sometimes, and I know this because they sell to me. Honestly, I can think of multiple situations where I have been sold to by people who have totally missed what I've told them. And actually, they weren't selling to me at all. Scripts. Sales scripts.
Okay, so I hate scripts with a passion. I think the best salespeople are, yes, active listeners, bring their intelligence and intentionality to every sales call. So they actively work on themselves to increase their knowledge, their domain expertise, their expertise in a particular industry, their expertise of the sector. They're constantly learning, whether it's reading books or audiobooks or learning about their industry and their products. I think they have to be lifelong learners. So to me, a good salesperson, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. A good salesperson has emotional intelligence, like they actively show that they're in tune with the other person, but they also have like other intelligence. What's the other, like IQ? And I'm not saying you need to be Einstein. You don't need to, have lots of degrees, but you need to be intelligent. You need to be intelligent to the point of view where you understand the problem of your prospects. You understand their issues really deeply. You understand business and have commercial smarts. And I think in order to do that, you really have to work on yourself. So talk to me about what are some of the other fundamental skills of really good salespeople?
Oh, do you mean skills or do you mean qualities? Because those are very different things. And you were talking about qualities there. And actually, I've worked with some pretty dumb people who are great salespeople. And they were great salespeople for that one quality that you mentioned there that's really important. Apart from the listening skills, it's emotional intelligence. It's being able to understand and read people. And which I've got to tell you, I'm not that, I've had to learn that. I wasn't that great at it. I've had to develop that myself. I didn't arrive as a natural salesperson in any sense other than I was interested in people and remain interested in people. I like people fundamentally. And everybody knows that. You meet me for the first time, the first thing you know is I'm somebody who likes people. And that is reflected in that one thing that builds relationships. And relationships are the key to this every time, which is, it goes back to listening. It's that thing where you allow that person to express what's in their heart or on their mind. And then you make sure they know, and you said that as well, that they were listened to. And that you've taken it on board and you've reflected it back to them, hopefully with some extra value. That you said, so what you're saying is this, this, and this, which means this, right? And then they know they're being listened to. Now that sounds incredibly manipulative, because if you were listening to this as a customer or as a client and you heard a salesperson saying, that's what I do, you go, that's really manipulative. But the truth is, it's how we behave. It's how decent people behave in every conversation. How people who are going to be liked behave in every conversation. And they're not doing it because they want to be liked. They're doing it because they're genuinely interested. And good salespeople are genuinely interested in their clients. They've worked out that their job isn't to make money. That's a wonderful byproduct of doing your job right. I never think about making money when I'm doing my job. I just concentrate on doing my job right. And then I'm always slightly surprised when I get paid at the end of it. But that's right. You do your job right in sales, you will make money. So don't think about the money. Just concentrate on being the right guy in the right place, doing the right thing. Everything after that, and you're right. I will say that you did manage to equate intelligence with lots of degrees at one point there, and as a guy whose last exam pass was his cycling proficiency test, I'm mortally offended by that.
No. What I said was, it doesn't.
I know what you said.
It doesn't mean degrees. It doesn't mean anything to do with formal education at all. In fact, this is a separate podcast, but I don't think formal education has anything to do with intelligence whatsoever. I lived with a doctor during university, and let me tell you, you do not want this man operating on you, and you. Please, if you only knew.
Once we finish this podcast, you give me his name just in case. All right. Now, the look, you don't have to be smart. You do have to be intelligent enough to be able to get some understanding of what it is that they're talking about. But the truth is, and here I'm speaking about the domain in which I operate, Nathan, which is pretty narrow. It's about how much of somebody's marketing budget can I stick my fangs into and suck up. And that is my job. And I tell my clients that's my job. And I also explain that I'm only going to do that, and I will take as much of their money as possible, but I'm only going to do that. I will take as much money as I can return in value. And they understand that's my job, is to get money off them, but my job is also to deliver commensurate value.
I love that. My mantra is that I'm actually not a very good salesperson, technically, but I know process. I have a very good process, and I stick to a process that's logical and that is thorough and that I walk through and deliver every single time. And that gets me to an outcome. And what I find is that poor salespeople, or salespeople that perform ineffectually, sometimes they have good months or good quarters, sometimes they have bad quarters, they don't have a process. They don't have a process that they religiously stick to, delivered in the whole of the organization, that the whole of the organization then respond to and deliver on a regular basis. Talk to me about the importance of sales process and why it's so important for organizations that succeed.
Well, earlier on I mentioned my good fortune that when I went into car sales, I ended up working with two guys who previously had worked for Thomson Regional Newspapers. And their sales education was totally different to the sales education of salespeople generally in car sales. And whilst I don't think I've had a minute of actual formal sales training in my life. Please excuse me. But a wonderful guy, sadly passed away far too young, a guy called David Noble, who I worked with for 5 years in car sales. And he'd been at Thomson Regional Newspapers. And he sat down with me and he got out the Thomson Regional Newspaper sales manual. It's a massive thing. You could do serious damage to somebody by dropping that thing on their heads or their feet. And he sat down with this ring-bound thing and he said, there's a page in here that will change your life. And I went, well, what's that then? And all it was Dipiter. Do they still use Dipiter?
I don't think so. I remember hearing about it.
I can't even remember what it stands for. But in the 1980s, everybody, all the companies there, Reed, EMAP, etc., were all working to Dipiter. If you hadn't been trained with Dipiter, you couldn't sell. But I had a look at it, and what it was a process. Now, I was a very, very socially inept human being at 17, 18 years old.
Oh, I think every 17-year-old is, but it's another conversation.
Yeah. Well, I was a fairly well magnified version of that. I knew how to listen. I was good at listening. Didn't know what to say. And so I was loud. I was loud in that way that empty vessels often are. Suddenly, I was given instruction in what to say. Suddenly, you're faced with a process. Suddenly, interactions stop being amorphous and become structured and processed. And to somebody who did not know what to say and therefore was constantly, frankly, making a dick of himself, to be suddenly faced with, that's okay, because if you listen to what the other person says, you can then say, well, either this or that. Now, you'd refer to it as an algorithm now. If they say this, you do that. If they say this, you do that. So I went, oh, I can buy into this. That was my sales career. That's where it came from. It came from the idea that I suddenly had a process. Now, as time goes by, you get to understand that, Nathan, as you just pointed out, successful people follow a process. Now, the truth is, salespeople follow a process. If you're not following a process, you're not a salesperson. Say you're a conversationalist, probably a very poor one, because you're not listening enough, who's either beating people down because they just buy to shut you up, or you're simply working through, you've got enough of a prospect base that peeing people off and finding people who'll cope with your bull is how you get through your working life. Great salespeople who don't waste opportunities do it by process. The process just underpins the important stuff. And the important stuff is understanding what your client needs and wants and helping them to get it and getting paid for that. And that's what good salespeople do. But the idea that you're not following a process, well, you're not a salesperson. You're a talker. And there are lots of places where you'll be very welcome. My sales team will not be one of them.
Richard, final question before I let you go. I could talk to you about this all day, and we're going to have to get you back on the podcast because there's so many questions that I didn't get to. But I can't let you go without asking you the question that actually led to us speaking in the first place, right? Because I put out a post on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago about Generation Z and millennials, and are they basically just really crap at sales? I put that out there as a provocation. I didn't actually state an opinion, but you promptly put me in my place.
I machine gunned you. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, you did.
I got out the Uzi and I went for you.
Yeah, and there's blood.
Unfair.
There's blood all
Very
over the
unfair.
floor.
Because what you were saying was very reasonable. It was frankly totally wrong, but it was very...
Say it like it is.
He was saying, well, they're working this way. They're doing this, and they want this, and they want that.
Yeah.
And that's the environment you're working with. And those are the people you're hiring. And my view is, you've got to work with that. The job of a sales leader is to take the people they've got and make the best out of them. And what you were saying there was the way that they operate, the way that they want to operate, doesn't fit with the mold of how we see salespeople, which is get on the phone, make the calls. They won't make the calls. Well, there's a reason why they won't make the calls, Nathan, because nobody wants the frickin' calls. Nobody wants a call. Do you want a call? What are you going to do? Your phone rings, you're going to answer it? I don't recognize that number. No, sod that. I'm not going to answer that. No. Unfortunately, the world in which because, I'm 130 years older than you, the world in which I went from, initially it was you sent a telegram, Actually, I did that. I did an entire campaign on telegrams once, but that's a whole other story. The cold call, the idea that you initiate or that you drive your sales through telephone calls, forget it. It's not going to happen now. Doesn't mean you can't do it. And once you have a relationship with clients, I WhatsApp my clients. I don't call them without asking first. But the idea, they're not getting on the phone enough. No, that's not how people engage. The people that you're hiring now for your sales teams understand, because that's the environment they've grown up in, they understand the sales environment better than you do. because they're selling to people with their mindset.
Great point.
And the people with their mindset accept communication in a different way to way that my generation and your generation accepted that.
Great point.
And we have to live with that. And we have to work with it. And that's how we will be successful. That's what I said to you, I think, wasn't it?
Put me in my place.
No, I didn't, because I don't think you disagree with the word.
No, I totally agree with you. But I just think that the way that you deliver it, I just think how direct and how forceful you are. It's a breath of fresh air, to be honest. And it's something that needs to be said, because a lot of business owners, look, I had a conversation with a business owner. The reason why I put that LinkedIn post out there is because I'd just come off the phone with a business owner who fired 2 or 3 of his salespeople because they were just like, look, I'm just sick to death of these young salespeople. They're no good. They don't like to work hard. I'm having to do all of the work, and they're just cashing the check when the money comes in. They're not doing any of the work that I used to do in order to build the business. And he just went on this long rant, basically. So then that prompted me to respond by creating that post. So, and it's part of other conversations that I've had with business owners of a certain age who grew up with telephone sales. And they realized that actually the way that they grew up and the way that they built their companies to become successful is not the way that younger people are approaching sales and new business. So there's this disconnect. And I think what you've said is spot on. There's a new way of communicating. There's a new way of reaching out to people. There's a new way of developing relationships and prospecting. And it isn't all about hammering the phone 100 times a day to people that you don't know. It's not about that. So, final question. And by the way, I'm going to have to invite you back on the podcast, because I want to know, if that's not the way, what is the way? How do we generate leads with people that we don't know?
We match our communication style to the manner in which it's going to be received best. And that means that we use the tools that didn't exist when Mr. Hammer on 100 calls a day was doing it. The tools are different. The tools by which we can do the job are different. Look at how you and I connected. You and I connected through LinkedIn. And I can tell you that there is no single tool of greater value to me than LinkedIn. I can make connections at a much higher level within businesses, and within very large businesses now, than I ever could when things were done by telephone. And a lot of that is down to how much, First of all, you try this, right? Do you have LinkedIn Premium?
I do.
Okay, you got LinkedIn Premium. You make first contact with somebody. Do you ever notice how many times you discover that that person has gone on your LinkedIn profile? Now, I have a look, and sometimes it's during the call. That's how people are sussing you out. They're using LinkedIn. They want to know. It's where your credibility is. You've got to make sure your LinkedIn profile's absolutely smart and portraying you as you would wish to be portrayed. But then there's other stuff. I can't even claim I'm that adept at it. I'm a frickin' dinosaur. You ought to get one of those Gen Zs on. They'll tell you how to do it. I'm a dinosaur by comparison. I've had to adapt. They have grown with it. I respect that because they understand. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a whole bunch of people out there of my age who are making the buying decisions. But you know what? They've adapted too. They don't want the phone to ring. They want their communication to come in different ways. I do use LinkedIn messages, for instance. Here we are talking about LinkedIn again. There are other tools are available.
Other tools are available. All right.
I use LinkedIn messages, and the amount of times that I have been able to create meaningful dialogue in that way with somebody I would never have been able to reach in the days when it was all done by phone. And when I'm sold to on those messages, I'm not being sold to. It's AI generated crap. And that's all about volume and not quality. It goes with list buying as well. I'm not a fan. The lists have to be clean. But you end up peeing off prospects. You burn prospects by poor communication. Oh, and another thing, Nathan, when you were talking about education, there's one aspect of education that needs far more attention than it's given because it gets more respect than I think people understand. That's good grammar, spoken and written, and particularly written. The amount of ambiguity in written communication I see, as well as, there's the poor grammar. I don't mind poor grammar because that's an aspect of our education system. But the problem with poor grammar is it gives ambiguity. Ambiguity means lack of clarity. If there's no lack of clarity in communication, what the hell are you doing as a salesperson? If there's no clarity in what you're saying, I still ensure that the salespeople that work for me are able to communicate very precisely in writing, which is really important. That skill hasn't gone. It's still vital. I'm proud of my kids. My kids have got great written communication. Right.
Richard, there is just so much here. At 172, there's a lot that you've learned in your time. You said 172 years older than me, so that makes me
I'm
200
now.
200 and something hard.
Yeah, I made my first sale to Gladstone.
Look, we're going to have to get you back on the show because there's so much more here that we didn't get time to get to. But I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I can't wait for our next conversation on the podcast. Tell our audience where they can go to learn more about you and what you do.
Well, just go to LinkedIn. My name is Richard Abels. That's Abels. Just go to LinkedIn. I'm there. I'm always happy to connect. And I work for the Lodestar. Don't look that up if you're in the freight industry. And that's me. Nathan, thank you very much. It's been a privilege.